Okay, when you think of bad Roman emperors, who's the first name that pops into your head? It's got to be Caligula, right? But here's the big question. Was he actually clinically insane? Or was he something else? Something way more calculated, and honestly, a lot more terrifying. Let's dig in and separate the myth from the man.
All right, let's just get the big one out of the way first. You know the story, everybody knows it, the one about him making his horse, Incitatus, a consul. I mean, that's the go-to example of his madness, right? So, did it really happen?
Well, the short answer is no, he didn't. But, and this is the terrifying part, he said he could. And that's what's so important here. This wasn't a sign of madness, oh no. This was the ultimate power move. It was a cruel, terrifying joke pointed right at the Senate. He was basically saying, your traditions, your sacred offices, they mean nothing to me. My power is so absolute I could make my horse your boss, and you couldn't do a single thing to stop me. That's not crazy. That's chilling.
So what makes his story so completely shocking is how it all started. Because he didn't start out as a monster. Far from it. He was hailed as a savior. When he came to power, at just 24 years old, he was basically Rome's golden boy.
I mean, his reign kicked off with so much promise. Think about it. He's the son of the super popular general Germanicus, and he's a direct descendant of Augustus. The pedigree was perfect. And right away, he starts doing all the right things. He reverses the awful policies of the last guy, brings back exiles, gets rid of censorship, and throws these huge, lavish parties for the senators. All of Rome just breathed this massive sigh of relief. Finally, their prince had come.
And you can feel how excited they were. To celebrate him becoming emperor, the people of Rome sacrificed, get this, 160,000 animals. That is a staggering number. This wasn't just some parade. It was a massive empire-wide party. They truly, genuinely believed the good old days were back for good.
Yeah, about that. That golden age? It was shockingly short-lived. I mean, within just a few months, that beloved prince started to change into something dark, something terrifying.
The ancient historian Suetonius, he really puts a pin in it. He's telling this story about one of Caligula's wild stunts, building a 3-mile bridge out of ships just so he could ride his horse across it. And then he drops this line, and it's like a record scratch. It's the moment everything splits in two.
So what on earth happened? Well, in his first year, Caligula gets super sick. The whole empire is holding its breath, praying for him to get better. And he does. But he's not the same person. Some historians think the illness just broke something in his brain. Others point to the death of his sister Drusilla, who he was incredibly close to. Whatever it was, the good, generous emperor was gone. In his place was this paranoid, greedy, totally chaotic tyrant.
But here's where it gets really interesting. A lot of modern historians have a different take, and it's maybe even more disturbing. They say he wasn't mad in a clinical sense. He was what they call a sick comedian. Picture this, a murderous child star who has never, ever been told no. He watched his own family get wiped out, and his main role model growing up was the twisted old Emperor Tiberius. So the theory goes, absolute power didn't drive him insane. It just gave him a massive, unlimited stage to play out his cruel, awful practical jokes.
And these weren't just little pranks. They were huge, public spectacles designed for one thing, to humiliate and terrorize the Roman elite. You know, the very people who were supposed to be helping him run the empire.
Okay, for example, take his invasion of Britain. He marches this huge army all the way to the coast. They're ready to go, and then, at the last second, he calls it all off. And his big order to his legions, he tells them to collect seashells. Seriously. Then he proudly calls them the spoils of the ocean. Can you imagine a more humiliating prank to pull on your own battle-hardened army? And the way he handled money was just as twisted. He'd hold these auctions and force senators to come and bid crazy amounts. There's this one famous story where an old knight actually falls asleep during the auction. And Caligula? He decides that every time the old guy's head nods, it's a new bid. So this poor guy wakes up and finds out he's just bought a bunch of gladiators for 9 million sesterces. Just insane.
And this really became his whole philosophy. He wasn't after love anymore. He was all about fear. He knew the powerful people in Rome hated his guts, and he loved it. He absolutely reveled in it, because their hatred just proved how much they feared him. And look, this cruelty wasn't just some political game. It was deeply personal. It was sadistic. When he would order an execution, he gave his torturers very specific instructions. He didn't want it to be quick. He wanted it to be slow, agonizing.
He wanted his victims to feel every single second of their death.
So, where do you go from there? You have absolute power, you have this taste for terror. Well, the next logical step, at least for him, was the ultimate ego trip. Caligula decided he wasn't just an emperor anymore. Nope, he was a god.
And this whole "I'm a god" thing, it almost immediately caused a massive international crisis. He declares himself a living god and orders a giant statue of himself, dressed as Jupiter, no less, to be put inside the temple in Jerusalem, in the Holy of Holies. For the Jewish people, this was the ultimate, unthinkable sacrilege. A huge rebellion was about to explode. The Roman governor on the ground thankfully knew this was a disaster and basically stalled, trying to buy time. And the only thing that stopped a full-blown war was that Caligula was assassinated.
And that's the real irony here. In the end, it wasn't the big political stuff that got him killed. It wasn't the near war or the blasphemy. It was something much, much smaller. It was his constant, petty, deeply personal insults.
The guys who finally did it weren't some noble senators trying to save the Republic. They were his own bodyguards, the men who were supposed to protect him. He just pushed him too far. He slept with the wife of one of them, Cornelius Sabinus, and then made fun of the guy about it in public. And another one, Cassius Chaerea, he constantly mocked for having a high-pitched voice. He would assign him these totally embarrassing, effeminate passwords like Venus or Priapus every single day. You can only humiliate a man so many times.
So it all came to a head on January 24th, AD 41. The day even started with a bad omen. Caligula spilled flamingo blood on himself during a sacrifice. Later that day, around lunchtime, he decides to take a shortcut through an underground palace tunnel. It was a fatal mistake, because down there, in that tight corridor, Cassius Chaerea and the others were waiting for him. They ambushed him, cutting him off from his most loyal guard.
And this was not a clean, quick job. This was pure rage, a frenzy. They stabbed him 30 times. That number 30, it just tells you everything. It shows you the raw, personal hatred he had built up in the very men paid to protect him.
The historian Dio Cassius summed it up with this perfect, brutal line. For all his talk about being a god, Caligula died a very, very human death, bleeding out on a palace floor. And after he was gone, his official legacy was literally declared to be nothing. They denied him a state funeral. The only person in all of Rome who cried for him was his wife, Caesonia. They found her weeping over his body. And then, shortly after, the assassins killed her and their baby daughter too, just wiping his entire family off the map. So that leaves us with the big question, right? Was Caligula just some unique one-off monster? A perfect storm of a twisted mind and a brutal childhood? Or is his story something more? A timeless, terrifying warning about what happens when you give any single person, in any time in history, absolute and unquestionable power.